Welcome back, everyone. This is Right Now here on the CBS 8 app. The fight to end child marriage is one step closer to landing on the governor's desk. In California, there is no legal minimum age to marry. This is a story that we had here on our show. And News 8's Abby Black continues to follow this issue and why the fight to end legal child marriage in California could soon pay off.
I was 16, he was 51. Well, he was 51 when we married.
Courtney Stodden married her acting coach, actor Doug Hutchinson, in 2011. It made headlines and punchlines. Today, she sees that it's seen differently.
He took my innocence. He took my childhood. He took everything, really.
Courtney's not alone. Christina Sutton married a 22-year-old in California when she was 17.
I was a child. I was 16 and then 17. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything.
California is just one of 3 states with no minimum age to marry. A judge can sign off with a child and parental interview, no matter how young the child. AB 1267 would ban it outright, no exceptions. Sutton testified in front of the Senate.
I was more concerned about getting that judge to do what I needed him to do so that I wasn't going to face further problems at home than I was concerned about telling him the truth.
Freddie Reese, founder of the nonprofit Unchained at Last, has fought to change California's laws for nearly a decade. AB 1267 has advocates optimistic.
We're talking about a human rights abuse. That's what the U.S. State Department calls it. There's a good reason for that.
Planned Parenthood California helped sink this bill for years over reproductive rights concerns. This time, they're not fighting it. They did not respond to our request for comment.
I'm just grateful that Planned Parenthood has withdrawn its opposition to this important legislation.
It's not unopposed. ACLU California Action says it's too soon, arguing the state should wait for more data before closing the door, but we found major discrepancies in public data. Advocates cite 35,000 California child marriages between 2000 and 2021. The state's own records show just 83 in the past 7 years. Data we got directly from the county's list even more.
If there's one child who was getting married in California against their will, that is one child too many.
Courtney tried to leave at age 19, but it took years to divorce. Now she's at the state capitol fighting to end child marriage.
These girls need help, and women deserve justice. And I know I deserve justice as well.
And here you will see that we have our Abby Black here in
Hello.
studio. And Abby, we talked about this story several months ago. And a large part of it was sort of the shock and awe that something like this can happen in the state of California, which politics aside, there are so many things that get started here in the state of California on a legal standpoint, innovation, so forth, that then gets copied across the country. And to see that the state of California was, and what objectively many people, parents or not, can say, felt so far behind the 8 ball, to see that we might be close here. What was the reaction from both Courtneys, and again, what is the indication about how this is eventually going to end? Do they have any indication about how the governor is going to react to this?
This has made it the furthest that it's gone. And so far, the fact that the Planned Parenthood has not filed any opposition to this bill is a huge win for those advocates and legislators who've been trying to push this bill through. Several versions of this bill, watered down bills. And so now there's, I just got off the phone with a staffer, and she had explained that, with all intent, it is planned to pass the Senate, and then it has to go back to the Assembly, and then hopefully, their deadline is August 31st. So this year, they finally believe that this can finally pass, which has been years in the making and several versions in the making.
So when we talk about, let's start at the very basics of this. What does this bill do?
It bans child marriage, or it finally puts a restriction on marriage.
Okay.
Right now, you can be any age. You can get married at 11 years old to a 17-year-old. You can get married at 11 years old to a 50-year-old person, as long as you have the parent's consent and the judge has interviewed both the parent and the child and they sign off on it. the data doesn't explain what judges have actually rejected this. As you heard in our interview with Christina, is that the fact is that when the judge did sit her down to interview her, he actually went around the table and looked her straight in the eye and said, "Is this what you want to do? I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing." And she was scared to say no.
Right.
So at least that judge did try to be an advocate for her. But at that moment, she felt like her back was against the wall,
Yeah.
and the only choice that she had was to marry him. Because if she didn't, what would be the fallout from this?
So the restriction gets put in place. Is there a minimum age?
So the minimum age is 18 years
now.
old. Now, the reason why they said it at 18 is because in California, the legal age is 18 years old.
Got it. Now, bringing up that point about, at least the judge interviewed, you'll hear from advocates and say that find me a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old who is going to, they feel like they have to do this. We know religion played a huge role in a lot of these sort of arranged marriages with a young bride, which is oftentimes the case. The majority of these cases, correct, are forced young brides, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And that religion plays a large part in this, and that this idea that you could interview the child and that the child would tell you the truth. Well, they're a child and they're being forced to do something against their will. What child is going to say the truth to a judge in a closed room, right?
Exactly. And that's why they say that they have to have these protections. I mean, you see all of these discrepancies in it, or the fact is that if there was a 13-year-old having sex with a 22-year-old, that would be considered statutory rape in California. Yes.
Yeah.
But if they're
Right.
married, it's not. And so, for many of these survivors, they say, I was sexually assaulted several times by my husband. And some people think, well, how can that be? It's like they are a child. They do not have the same legal rights as an 18-year-old person does. And even after 18, once you are married and say you turn 18, trying to get any type of legal help is really difficult. But especially if you're under 18, you legally cannot get a divorce. If you're under 18 years
Right.
old, you have to have your parents' signature. Well, your parent's the one that has forced you or encouraged you to get married at this young age. Yeah. Sometimes you can't get into a domestic violence shelter if you're under 18 years old.
Right.
So, this is why they're really trying to push this to at least try to restrict child marriages. That forced marriages, this is another nuance of forced marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So forced marriage is whether you're of age or not. Unchained at Last, their goal is to end child marriage by 2030. And if California can do this, hopefully, there's other states that look to California and say, we can do this too.
Yeah. And again, I want to preface this by saying that, this is something that there's a lot of research that has been done about the dangers of child marriage, and that, like, objectively, this is something that a number of states are trying to put in place to protect young children here when we're talking about this. But I do want to talk about how it is that we got to this place. Why have previous iterations of a bill like this to protect children from being entered into forced marriages, why have they failed?
Well, many will tell you it's because Planned Parenthood California has opposed this bill. Planned Parenthood in other states has not challenged it, but they have in the past. And I think, when you're thinking about our Democratic lawmakers that have sponsored these bills, well, a lot of them as well are in line with Planned Parenthood. So, it's like, well, if I go against Planned Parenthood in this bill, what will happen with my next bills?
Right.
And Planned Parenthood, in the past, Jack, like you've said, and you were going to pull up the letter in the past, Planned Parenthood,
this is what they have said in the
ACLU,
past, correct?
Action,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
the National Center for Youth Law, this is what they've said in the past. We must respectively oppose, this was previous bills, AB 2924, which would levy a total ban on legal marriage for minors in California. We would fear would drive young people who are already in abusive relationships further underground, out of the reach of social services, and negatively impact those young people who willingly enter a legal marriage. But the problem is that these are children getting married, and they can't make, their brains are still developing as well.
Yeah.
And some of them are, many are manipulated, many, for their parents, they're being forced into this. And, Planned Parenthood has also had said that this might diminish their reproductive rights. Obviously they advocate for other types of reproductive rights for young girls and boys as well. And so they feel like by stripping their rights to get married, then what does that mean for their other rights as well? So finally this year, anytime we talk to an assembly member or anyone who's in support of this, we say, what does this mean now that Planned Parenthood we've reached out to them to try to get their take on why now are they not opposing this?
And we should, again, I hate to repeat what you may have already just said, but we should repeat again, Planned Parenthood, while no longer in opposition, has not exactly voiced support either.
Correct.
And the ACLU has maintained their position at this point as well, right?
Yes, they've maintained their position. This year they're saying, there's these discrepancies in data. We still want to wait for our data to come back, which there is a lot of discrepancies in data. But just like you heard assembly members say, one marriage is too many.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if it's happening, every single day and there's hundreds of thousands of child marriages if there's just one child marriage.
Right. I know that you said that Planned Parenthood didn't give you a reason for their, somewhat change in position, or they're just unwillingness this year to engage in the conversation. During your interviews, whether it was Christina or anyone else, did they have any sort of reaction to that change? Because I think you mentioned it earlier at the beginning of this portion of the interview. That's one of the steps that is really raising the hopes of this of Unchained at Last and these survivors to see some change happen. Do they have any sort of reaction to this change in stance?
They're just relieved.
Yeah.
When we ask about, why did Planned Parenthood, they don't have an answer for it, or they don't want to comment about it. They just say, we just want to move forward with this. And finally, Planned Parenthood has not voiced their opposition, which has really helped in our victory with this bill, or to help move it forward.
Okay. Well, as we wait, what we're saying here is that the math is projecting that this is gonna pass. Do we know, has the governor weighed in on this topic prior? Like, is it a guarantee? Is this a veto situation potentially?
Well, I reached out to the governor's office last Thursday, and typical of them, they say, the governor often doesn't comment on pending legislation.
Okay.
So he picks and chooses when he wants to comment on pending legislation. Okay. I think it just depends what it means to him. For this one, he has not, but I believe in the past, years ago, he has voiced support for it. But at this stage in the game where his political life is at right now, who knows exactly. But if there's a majority of Democrats that support this in California, you could only assume that this is something that he would oppose. So what this bill would do is that there finally puts an age restriction, no exceptions, because that's what's been exceptions. Yes, you have to be 18 to marry in California, with the exception that you have your parents' signature and a judge signs off on it. This would now no longer allow any child under the age of 18 to marry regardless.
You mentioned Courtney Stodden in your piece. You interview her, and you mentioned again the sort of way that marriage was digested in the mainstream at the time. And I think we're all having a little bit of revisionist history about that, right? Because it was Entertainment Tonight. It was punchlines. It was jokes. It wasn't seen as this wrong at the time.
And it kind of puts a knot in your stomach.
It does, doesn't it?
Wow. And it wasn't that long. It was only 10 years ago.
I know.
I mean, we're not talking about 30, 40, 50 years ago, way back in the day.
And that was not a religious thing either.
No.
That was the Hollywood actor. He was in The Green Mile. The name escapes me, but he played the prison guard, Hutchinson.
Doug Hutchinson.
And, and he had married this 16-year-old girl. And it was just sort of seen as like,
ooh,
wow.
Oh my God, he married, you kind of look like Anna
It reminded
Nicole
me,
Smith.
exactly. It reminded me of the reaction to the Anna Nicole Smith marriage, which we should point out, Anna Nicole Smith at that time was an adult. She just married a much older man.
Right, but we also see that all of these mental health.
She was an adult, right? I'm sorry, I don't mean to.
I believe she was an adult, but we don't know what happens behind closed doors, and you just think, yes, I mean, she was 16 years old. She said, but you looked like you were 35. It's like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I was a child.
Yeah.
Whether I looked like a 35-year-old woman, whether my body, was developed like a 35-year-old woman, I was still a child, and there was no one in her corner, she says, to help her escape. And when she did try to escape, it was this whole manipulation. And now that she's out of this marriage, she's now learning that Hutchinson had this playbook, and he's done it with other women or other girls as well. And so, many of these men will prey on girls that don't have that familial support or that male figure in their life, or they're kind of distant from them. Yeah. With this, I think it was like, let's make it to Hollywood. Let's make you a big star. Yeah. And the family, she just says that her mom says that she was manipulated as well.
Okay. Well, Abby, thank you so much for following this topic. Continue, to stay on it and see exactly where this goes here as we anticipate again, the very latest. Again, August 31st, that's the deadline for a lot of the bills that are currently being debated and voted on here in the legislature to get to Governor Gavin Newsom's desk. It's obviously a topic that we're going to continue to follow here